Hello, I'm Perry, and you're early, but that's okay. I'm just getting set up here for the webinar. But the nice part of it being early is that you get to put your question up first. So I want you to take a look below this video, and you'll see a spot for putting in a question. I'm going to repeat this later, but so if you have a question, feel free to put that question in there and I'll answer it either maybe before the webinar if I get all set up here. It's a little complicated, but yeah. So put in your information there. Also, I like to know where people are from. So if you have, if you feel like, just feel like put it in a comment. Just tell me your name and where you're from, and I'll give you a little shout out. I'm in Chicago right now. Chicago, one of my favorite cities, my fair city. Although there are lots of cities that I like, but Chicago. So let's see if anybody has put anything in there. Get here to the control session. All right. Got 11 people online now. So if you want to let me know if this is working, feel free to just put your name and tell me where you're from and give me a little shout out. Meanwhile, I'm going to continue to keep getting set up here. It's my big mug OT. Just going to take a look, see if the webinar is working. Looks like it's working. Yay. Okay, so that's working. We'll get started in just about 12 more minutes. Here we are. It looks like I'm all set up. I'm usually not this on the ball. All right, if you are here joining, I am Perry Romanowski. This is our monthly webinar for Chemist Corner. We've done webinars formulating just the general cosmetic formulating. We did that in January. We did a naturals webinar last month in March. And this month we're doing a formulation one where I'm going to show you exactly how to take an ingredient list and to turn that into a starting formula. So we have over almost 2,300 people signed up for this webinar, which is pretty decent. So if you're on now, I'm going to get started in 11 minutes. I like to be timely. And if you have a question, or if you want to just shout out and say howdy, feel free to post below this video. There's a spot that says questions. Feel free to write your name, where you're from, or any kind of question you might have. If you don't have a question, I always like to say, hey, where are you from? And let's see what we have here now. Got 22 people online. We do have a question that was sent in by Sarah. Interesting question. She asks, what are the benefits of using CO2 extracts versus a tincture or an infusion? This is an interesting question, and it's interesting in that it's not a thing that, like cosmetic chemists formulating in industry, we don't think about this much. And it's really because the ingredients the natural ingredients that you get through extracts or tinctures or infusions, for the most part, these things are going to be what I call claims ingredients. They're not going to have a huge noticeable impact on the formula. I know a lot of people are, you read, you research, you see ingredients, and there's a lot of interesting marketing behind ingredients, especially natural ingredients and all the great things that they can do. But if you talk about the science and what's really provable, There's really not a lot of good provable evidence that if you take an ingredient, say an extract or a tincture or an infusion, and put it in your formula, that you're going to get some measurable, noticeable difference. So having said that, the one that you use, whether you're using the extract, the tincture, the infusion, what you use is going to really depend on the nature of your formula. For something that is more water soluble, an infusion, a water infusion or an alcohol infusion might work better. For something that is more of an oil-based formula, tinctures probably work better. And that's just from a formulating standpoint. But from the standpoint of, is this ingredient going to have a real effect? Um, you'll be hard pressed to tell a difference between any of them, because you'll be hard pressed to tell a difference between whether you're using that ingredient or you're not using that ingredient, to, when it comes right down to it. But um, I hope hopefully that helps sort of enlighten there. But yeah, it really depends on the type of formula you're using. Giovanna from Brazil, welcome. It's so good to have you online, all the way from Brazil. Welcome. Ricardo asks, just check this off. Ricardo asks, is it possible to have a face-to-face course? I do actually do live courses through the Society of Cosmetic Chemists. I'm doing a course on natural formulating in October, a live course, I believe through the Carolina SCC, we're setting something up. And I may have another course at another point during the year. But so it is possible to have face-to-face course. And often I have gone into companies. I'll fly out to pretty much wherever and do an all-day course for a company. So if that's something you're looking to do, I do those things. You can contact me via email and we can set something like that up. And when I have the information for the live courses through the SCC, I will certainly send that information to everyone who's on my email list. So, thanks, Ricardo. This is Chemist Corner webinar for April, and we're going to be talking about formulating from an ingredient list. I am Perry Romanowski, and I'm in Chicago. So if you're on the line and you want to just say hi, feel free to post your name and where you're from in the box below. We've had people from all over the world, the UK. Now, I change up. I changed up the timing for this one. I went a little earlier so we get people at different parts in the world. It's always difficult when you broadcast something for the entire world to get a time that works for everybody. Since I am located in the United States, I tend to be more US centric. That's just what I'm used to. If there is a large demand, I'd be happy to speak at a different time. So maybe at some point I can do a poll and see what time would work best for you. But for this webinar, we have almost 2,300 people signed up. So that's the nice part also is that I record everything. We got Nora from Saudi Arabia. Hello from Saudi Arabia. Wow, great to have you on. Julie from Dallas, Texas. So nice to have you on, Julie. And we've got Deborah from Kansas. Oh, hello, Deborah. Nice to have you online. I've digitally connected with Deborah before. So it's great to have you online. We're going to get started in just 5 minutes. I have a little spot of tea here. I drink tea because I'm too young for coffee, I always say. But Ken from the UK checking in. Hello, Ken. And hello, Joel from Malvern, Pennsylvania. I've not been to Malvern, but glad to have you on board here. Somebody from my hometown in Illinois. Well, Skokie is not my hometown, my home state. Hello, Annette from Skokie. We've got Mawa from New York City. New York City, an excellent place there. Tanya, all the way from South Africa. Hello, Tanya. Welcome. We got Emily from Louisville, Kentucky. Oh, this is great. Everybody coming online. Oh, all the way from India is Kartik. Hello. And Frankie from London. Hello. Boy, we've got lots of people online. I think we've got every continent except Australia. We've got Anna from Mexico City. Love Mexico City. I was flying in one time to Mexico City and I was just struck by how huge Mexico City is. It's ginormous. Karen from Maryland. Hello, Karen. And Sasha from South Africa. She enjoyed the previous webinar. So, well, thank you everyone for joining. Juliana from Canada, Calgary, Canada. So we got lots of people checking in here. Oh, from a new country here. Bori from Germany, from Hamburg. Wow. And Padma from India joining on. So great to have you all on here. We're going to get started in just 3 minutes. And if along the way you have questions or you have questions right now that you want to make sure that I get to, feel free to post them in the video, in the box below the video. And I'll answer them at the end of this talk here. We got Beatriz from Guatemala of the Central American Association of Cosmetic Sciences. Hello, welcome. So I remember we have some members from the International Federation of the Society of Cosmetic Chemists. It's great to have you here. El Sadiq from Libya. Hello, welcome. Great to have you here. Kim from Bradford, Maine. Hi, Kim. And Reza checks in to say hello. Hello, everyone. We're just 2 minutes away from getting started here. The talk will be about, well, I have 40 minutes, but these things usually go on. After that, I answer questions the whole time. So go on at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I've gone as long as 2 hours. We'll see if my voice holds up for the memory. Hello, Kay from the UK. Great to have you on board here. We've got a number of people signed up for this, and we're going to get started in just 2 minutes. Robin from Scotland. I haven't visited Scotland yet, but I'd love to go there. This year, I am actually going to Australia. I'll be in Australia in May. And I'll be speaking at a Society of Cosmetic Chemists meeting there in Canberra. I'm also going to be in Italy. There's the IPCE conference in Italy in June, so I'll be speaking there also. So if you happen to be in Australia or Italy, feel free. Maybe you can stop by. We've got Juliana has a question. I'm going to get to that question, but I see we're just about a minute away, and I don't want to short that question. So I'll make sure that I answer it at the end of the talk. All right. And we're just 1 minute away. Incidentally, if you're online, you'll see to the left of this video. Well, I guess it depends on how you're looking at it. Could be to the right, I don't know, below the video, one of the sides. You can see that there is a free gift there. So feel free to just download that. If you click on the video and it doesn't download, then click on the link, it does not. You can right click on the link and then hit save as. All right, I see it is the top of the hour, my time, and that is going to get us started. Hi, I am Perry Romanowski, and this is the Chemist's Corner webinar for April. We are going to go through I have about 40 minutes of slide content, and then I'll be answering questions too. So if you have questions, just post your question below. If you include the email, then that ensures that I can answer it. And if I don't get to it in this webinar, I do actually go through and answer any questions that were sent in during the webinar. I also answer questions that were sent in previous. So if you sent previously, I've been answering those questions, and I'll answer some of those online here. All right, so let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Like I said, we have almost 2,300 people signed up for this, so clearly this is something where there's a lot of interest. I'm going to switch over to, let's see, I gotta share my screen. This technology is always a little challenging here, but let's see what we've got here. Okay. Share the screens. Okay. So thanks for joining. First things first, free gift for joining, and just the people who are online now. Actually, the truth is, if you're watching a replay of this and you send me an email, I'll send you the link to this. But get that free handbook of practical formulating. There's 100 plus pages. We got formulation tips in there. Cost savings idea. There's even a resources section. So it's a pretty handy gift. It's all yours free just for joining today. Also, if you're not aware of it, we still have the free series called 30 Days to Become a Better Cosmetic Chemist. This is my foray into podcasting. And so it's just 30 short, 10 or 20-minute episodes. You can listen anytime. You can sign right up there. Each lesson can be delivered each day, and the audio version is free. You can also buy the companion workbook that goes along with it. So you can just get that, and the companion workbook has exercises and a little more resources information. And it's just a text version of what you're going to hear there. So. All right, and just before I get started, in all of my presentations, some years ago, I came up with this mission statement for my own purse, back about 1998 or so, and it's this 3-word mission statement. It's that guides all of my presentations. So whenever I do a presentation, I try to hit all of these points, and those are educate, inspire, and entertain. Now, just to ensure that I get at least one of these accomplished in this, I'm going to now switch back. Go. I'm going to now switch back to there we are. Okay. Just shortly here, and I have these bean bags, which I will quickly juggle for you. All right. A little rusty there. All right. So now, at least, if I don't get any of those, at least you were entertained momentarily. So let's get on with the cosmetic science. I wasn't always a scientist here. All right. Today's talk is from Chemist Corner. We're creating a formula from start to finish. In our first webinar this year, we covered the basic introduction to cosmetic formulating, and this included an overview of the 6 steps of formulating, including how to set up a lab, picking a benchmark, starting formulas, getting raw materials, prototyping. So in this webinar, we're going to get a bit more detailed, looking at a specific product and how you follow those steps to make this product. There will also be a question and answer session at the end, so feel free to post your questions as I present. Like I said, there's a box below. Put your name, put your question in, and at the end of this, I will give some answers there. Now, while you may have learned about molecules, organic synthesis, and thermodynamics in college, you probably didn't learn any practical skills that you can apply to a formulating job in the cosmetic industry. At least I didn't. So webinars like these and our own practical cosmetic formulating course were designed to really help bridge the gap between college and coming into the webinar. And if you stay tuned to the end of this webinar, I'm going to have talk about the course a little bit more. So let's jump right in. Now, to illustrate this process of creating a cosmetic product from scratch, we're going to start at the very beginning and create a shampoo. I'm doing shampoo because it's a relatively simple formulation, and it requires, the most basic type of cosmetic lab equipment, and nearly everyone on the planet uses shampoo. Something like 95% of people use shampoo. It was also one of the first products that I made. So you can see when I was going through college studying chemistry, I never thought much about what I was going to do after I graduated. I only stumbled into the cosmetic industry when I got a job at Alberto Culver. Now, I was working on the VO5 hair care brand and the Tresemme brands. And, I didn't know at the time, but it turned out that working at that company on that brand was really the perfect training that I needed to learn the ins and outs of formulating pretty much any kind of cosmetic. Over 25 years later, I'm still applying the lessons that I learned in those early days of formulating. So, if you want to create a formula, of course, we're just going to quickly go through some of the equipment that you need. Now, when you're hired as a cosmetic chemist out of college, you typically will start in a lab that's already equipped with the things you need to make cosmetic products. And this is one of the big advantages of working for a sizable company right out of college. But if you're hired on as a startup or a small company or some consultant service, you may not be as well equipped. And this is also true if you want to start your own cosmetic line or make products at a lab you set up in your home. So you may need to purchase some equipment to get your lab set up to do work as a cosmetic formulator. But here is the basic equipment that you need. You need containers, you need weighing equipment, you need mixers, you need a heating and cooling equipment. There are lab supplies that you need, weigh boats and Kim wipes and that kind of thing, test tubes. And then, of course, there's the testing equipment like pH meter and things. Now, in the previous webinar, we went over these in much more detail, so I'm going to assume that we don't have to, but I'm going to tell you the stuff you need for making a shampoo. For making prototypes of it like a shampoo, you really need beakers, like glass beakers, and in the prototype phase, usually your batches are going to be 200 grams or 300 grams. So having 300 milliliter or 500 milliliter beakers are really useful. As far as a scale goes, when you're making prototypes, when you're doing this kind of work, you should be making batches that are like I said, 200 or 300 grams at minimum. I always like to make 400 grams, to tell you the truth, but I can understand how if you don't have access to a lot of raw materials, you might not do that. Now, so when you're getting a scale, you want to have a scale that can have an accuracy of 0.01 grams. That should really be enough. It might be harder to make the proper colors, just if that's the only level you have of accuracy. Good color, you need to be even more accurate. But as far as just making your batches, 0.01 grams is probably enough. For mixers, the best type of mixer for a cosmetic lab is a center stir mixer overhead. An example is the mixer in the picture in this slide here. That's a Silojex mixer, which is shown right there. And that's really the kind of mixer when you're making shampoos or conditioners that most people in cosmetic industries use. You just have a lot more control over the RPMs. You have control over the type of paddle that you use, the height. So you have a lot of control there. The mixer motor is really only one aspect of your mixing setup, though. The other important piece is the mixer blade, and this is also called the impeller. When making a formula like a shampoo or body wash, you use a paddle blade or a propeller blade. In addition to the mixer motor, you also need an impeller. You're also going to need equipment like a stand to hold the mixer, above the mixing container. You need clamps to secure the mixer. And you also want to have a platform or a stand. And this could just be your countertop, or this can be actually the hot plate or water bath, which gets us to the next one. Speaking of hot plates, that's something you'll need to make a shampoo. A ceramic coated plate with a temperature range of 100 degrees Celsius is fine for making shampoos. It's nice to warm up a shampoo recipe. You can actually do a cold process, but when you warm it up to 35°C or 40°C, it just makes things blend together much more quickly and easier. As far as test equipment goes, for making a shampoo or a body wash, the key pieces of test equipment that you're going to need is a pH meter and a viscometer. And the pH meter helps ensure that you're within a proper pH range for the shampoo to work properly and stable. The viscometer will help show you whether the product is the right thickness. Okay, that's pretty much the setup, except of course for the raw materials, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. Now, next is our benchmark. If you've already identified a product that you want to copy, then that's your benchmark, right? Often during your job as a cosmetic formulator, your marketing group or your client will bring you a product that they want to emulate or copy. So you don't always have a choice, but that's typically how the job of a formulator goes. one of your marketing people comes in and says, "Oh, I love this product. I want you to make it." And then you got to figure out how to make it. But if you're working on a completely new product and haven't been given any specific direction, the best thing that you can do is to find a product already on the market and then use that as your benchmark. Your goal will be to knock off that product and ideally to make it better. I mean, you want to make something that works just as well, but really, as a creative formulator, you should be always striving to make products that work better than anything. You don't want to just become a copier. Now, before picking a benchmark, it's helpful to know what that is. A benchmark is an existing formula that has many of the same characteristics that you want in your future formulation. It doesn't have to be exactly what you're trying to create, but it should give you a target for your formulation to meet or exceed. Incidentally, if you're working with a cosmetic formulator, giving them a benchmark is the best way to ensure the formula gets made the way you want it. Now, so a lot of you might have this idea that you want to start your own cosmetic line. And often it is good to just work with a formulator. But if you want to have a product the way you want it, providing your formulator a benchmark is really a great choice. Now, there are a number of factors to consider when picking a benchmark, but the most important things include market popularity, performance, and product aesthetics. But I say the most important factor to consider might be market popularity. And while the best selling product is not necessarily the best performing product, you still want to make sure that your new formulation performs as well as the most popular product. The reason is that it is highly likely that your consumer is familiar with the popular products, and that they sort of built up these performance expectation on that experience. For a product like a shampoo, it's relatively easy to find out what the most popular products are. You just go to Google and type, best-selling shampoo. Now, ideally, if you're making a shampoo, you'll also want to find out what the best performing or best-selling shampoos are. To find the best performer, you should get samples of all the competitive products and then run them through a series of lab or consumer tests to figure out which one's the best. When I was working on hair care products, the Pantene formula consistently scored highest in both our lab and consumer tests. It's important to note, too, that these were blind tests, so that didn't bias the results. So whenever you're evaluating something, it's always good to do it on a blinded basis. That way you're able to completely ignore any of the marketing message and you just get the sense of how a product actually works. Now, if you're making a product for the general population, picking a benchmark from the best-selling products is an excellent strategy. But if you have a niche consumer, for example, curly-haired people or people focused on natural products, you'll need to pick a benchmark that really reflects their reality. Ultimately, you want to pick a benchmark that matches the expectations of your specific consumer. So let's talk about using a benchmark. Once you picked your benchmark, you need to come up with a battery of tests to quantify how well it performs. Now, this will be highly dependent on the type of product it is, but it should include a mix of lab tests and panel tests. At first, you should use the product yourself to get a sense of how it performs. Become an expert at evaluating that product. You need to become an expert at using it, which can be challenging if you're a guy and you're working on like a lipstick product or you need to color your hair. I remember when I was working on a hair color product, I actually had my hair colored just so I get that experience of what it's like to get your hair colored. So I haven't had my hair colored since, but I really encourage formulators to use the product that they're using. And while you're using the products, make sure you use it a few times and keep records of your experience. But while you're using, imagine the consumer. Take notice of the way that the product is applied. Ask yourself different questions and keep track of your responses. Is it easy to use? Do you like how it looks, how it feels? How does it look and feel when you're using it? Is there anything different compared to other products? Do you have fun using the product? So all of these things are important to get to know. Even before you do any formulating, just become an expert at using that product. Now, on subsequent trials, See which things that you keep noticing over and over and which things don't seem to matter. If you had another product in the same category, try it and see what differences you notice. Forget about the claims that are written on the product or the story that's used to support it. You should try to forget about the fragrance, but that's hard too. Most of the statements that you're going to read for marketing of a product, they're just stories, and they don't actually impact how the product performs. That's harkens back to what I was talking about with the tinctures and the extracts from the beginning. A lot of those things support stories, but when you're using a product, your experience is what you really want to focus on. Now, going through the experience of using a product is going to allow you to pick up the subtle clues about what is important, what's not. You'll get information about the rheology, the feel, the greasiness, and really the more interaction that you can have with the product, the better. If you can use a product exclusively for a week, this is an excellent practice. At the very least, use the product 3 or 4 times just so you know that what the consumer is experienced. And you don't have to, continue to use the product once your project's done. But while you're trying to knock off a competitor, the more exposure that you have to that product, the better. Now, to create a great shampoo, it's incredibly helpful to know what it means to be a great shampoo. And if you're going to create a formula, you need to become expert enough to know, were you successful? When I was developing the Feek shampoo formula, in addition to using the product multiple times a day, I also ran tests like foaming tests, tress combing tests, tress washing tests, panel tests. And this is where you have a bunch of people try out the product, try out a competitive product, and just get feedback. I used those scores from these tests, and that set my benchmark levels for any prototype that I created that I need to meet or exceed. So benchmarks are a great way to help guide your formulations and also show data to your boss that the formula you created is every bit as good as the competition. You should use a benchmark for every product that you formulate. All right, now we have our benchmark picked. And we've characterized the important things about it, what it looks like, what it smells like, feels like, how it uses, how it performs. Now you have to start devising your first prototype. And the most useful tool for knocking off any product is that list of ingredients, or the LOI, as we say in the industry. Now, just a word about ingredient lists. Every cosmetic product produced in the US and most other places requires the company to put a list of ingredients on the package. Ostensibly, this is done for consumers so they can identify any product that has an ingredient to which they might be allergic. Companies are supposed to follow the naming and labeling rules as set out in the latest edition of the INCI dictionary, the International Nomenclature of Cosmetic Ingredients. This is used all around the world. And you should follow the rules set there and the names of ingredients that are set there. And for most mid-size and large companies, they actually do follow these rules pretty stringently. Regulatory groups are pretty strict with them. There are some companies that play a little fast and loose with these rules, but I don't encourage that. It is against the rules. And you can possibly get a letter from the FDA if you're in the US, or from the EU regulatory boards too. Now, so I encourage you to follow these the rules. Now, one thing I should mention is that you might come onto a product on the market and look at the ingredient list and you go like, how do they make this without a preservative? Or there's no emulsifier in here, or I don't really recognize that ingredient. The reality is not every company follows the rules. A lot of companies, they make mistakes, or they just don't include ingredients that, they don't want people to know are in there. So you cannot assume that ingredient lists, especially ingredient lists from smaller companies who are a little more, who can be a little more risky, not necessarily there. So assuming the ingredient list is correct, though, it's helpful to analyze it by figuring out the most important ingredients and the relative amounts of those ingredients. If you have the LOI, the first thing you want to do is copy the LOI into a spreadsheet. I find that pretty helpful. And this will be where you begin making your preliminary formulas. If you don't have an LOI, or you don't feel like typing, then you can usually find that ingredient list online. The first place to look is the company's website. Many or most reputable companies have ingredients listed for all of their products. Ideally, they will list them by the approved names found in the INCI dictionary. And if not, some further investigation might be required from you. If the company's website doesn't have the information, check sites like Amazon.com or Ulta.com. These sites provide a nice listing of ingredients. They also give the claims in a handy dandy digital format. You can also do a Google search for ingredient lists plus product names. And sometimes you'll find that a person just typed it out on like a public forum. So that could be helpful too. But just a caution, I just want to remind you, uh, the LOIs you find on the internet are not always 100% correct. I remember when I was working on a project, I needed the ingredient list from a Suave product. So I went online, drugstore.com, which is a nice, highly reputable site. I got the ingredient list, and there was an ingredient listed in the formula that just wasn't in their formula. So don't rely 100% on the accuracy of those. Now, to make it easy for this webinar, we're going to start with the following ingredients. Now, this is my own brand of shampoo, Feek. I actually launched it last year as a sort of a demonstration product of how you launch a product line. So I went through all the steps, and I have actually an audio recording and documentary of it all. And it's very interesting. If you're interested in Feek, you can go to feek.com, get a sample of this. But I'm sharing the entire formula and the thoughts about it. So, I use Feek as an example because I know the formula. I know why all the ingredients are used, and plus I don't mind sharing it. I firmly believe that it is marketing of cosmetics that is really the most important part of being successful. Of course, you need to have a great formula, but having a great formula is not really enough to be a success. I've heard some people complain in the past that some of the things that I'm going to tell you here is just stealing other people's ideas or their intellectual property. And, I don't really see it that way for a few reasons. But just to allay those fears, I'm going to use only my formula and how, so there you go. All right, let's go from the label. So here's the label. You can see the ingredients are listed right there. So I brought them down, and here we go. Here we have the list of all of the ingredients in the Feek shampoo. The next thing you want to do is you want to give your best guess about the functions of those ingredients. Now, if you don't know the function, you can consult a source like the INCI dictionary, ulprospector.com, Node, that's knowde.com, or even go to Google, look up an ingredient. This is going to help you figure out the formula. And with time and experience, you're going to learn what all these ingredients do, of course, and which ones are blends and that kind of thing. So the formula, this formula contains various classes of ingredient like a solvent, a primary surfactant, secondary surfactants, conditioning ingredients, preservatives, adjustment ingredients. And so I have this list here put in a spreadsheet. Now, I won't go into it in this webinar, but in our practical cosmetic formulating course, we do go through all of these different types of ingredients, what they do, and how much is used in a wide variety of different formulas. So if you want to more quickly learn about raw materials, maybe the practical cosmetic formulating course would be right. But again, back to our formula development, the next thing you'll want to do is figure out the main ingredients that really make the product. So here's a list of the functions of all those ingredients. You can see we have water as the solvent. We have a few primary surfactants. These are the detergents that clean. The betaine that helps to make the foam a certain way. We have adjustment agents. We have conditioning agents, preservatives, other fragrance in there. So we have a number of different ingredients in there. But when you've got an ingredient list, you'll want to go through and put down this list and the function of all those things. Now, once you have that, we want to think about the 1% rule. Now, here's the 1% rule. This applies anybody who's following the INCI dictionary. This applies, and it specifically applies in the United States. So the 1% rule is if you have an ingredient above 1%, you have to list those things in order of concentration. Now, while many of the so once you have that list, you know those first few ingredients are in order. So after that 1% level, so 1% and below, that can be listed in any order that you want. Some other things you might notice is like colorants are usually put last. Preservatives are usually put at the end, and the way marketers work is they usually put ingredients that they want to feature. They want to put them up as high as they can, but if it's not at 1%, they can only put it at a certain height. They can't put it above an ingredient. Now, this assumes people are following the proper rules. Just another note, sometimes a company is going to list out their active ingredients, and then they put a specific percentage for them. This is incredibly useful because it lets you know exactly how much of that ingredient to use. Now, put this number next to the ingredient on your formula sheet. Moving forward, the goal of your research effort will be to figure out what's the percentage of all the major ingredients on this list. Now, at this point, we are not too worried about the minor ingredients because as far as the function of the product goes, they have less perceptible effects. Now, that's not to say if something is in there at less than 1%, it has no impact. Certainly, polyquaternium 10 or the guar, they have an impact on conditioning. But as far as the main function of the product, at this point, you just kind of want to ignore those minor ingredients at the moment. So we have our formula here. We have our guesses of what they do. Now we've got to guess at the 1% line. So here we have, here is our guess at the 1% line. So I've looked at, if you look at the list here, we have water, we have the primary surfactants, those are probably higher. The betaine, I know that's higher. Sodium chloride, typically sodium chloride is used at formulas like 1.5%, so I kind of know that. Lauryl glucoside, I know that polyquaternium is not used in formulas at 1%. So the 1% line, 1% is kind of the maximum you'd use that. You certainly wouldn't use guar at that high. So I know that the 1% line is somewhere around here. We have the stearyl citrate, which is an appearance modifier. I know appearance modifiers are usually 1%, 1.5%. So I'm guessing that the 1% line is right around here. And so now I've got the 1% line. So, that leaves me with the list of the most important ingredients. Now, once you have that list of the most important ingredients and their relative abundance, you have to make an educated guess about what are those ingredient levels, right? And with experience, you can learn this. But of course, in our practical cosmetic course, we go into some more tricks and details things. But here are a few tricks that you can do. So here's the list of the stripped down LOI. So we just have water, sodium cocoa isoethionate, sodium lauryl sulfate, sodium lauryl F sulfate, betaine, sodium chloride, the glucoside, and the stearyl citrate. And you can see here, we know that these are in order. So we have the less abundant here, the more abundant there. Water for a shampoo is always the top one. But let's look at some clues to figuring out these percentages. We can check the patents. Big companies love to patent as many formulas as they can. Now, this prevents other people from duplicating their formulas. And you should know that it's not legal to sell a product that you've duplicated from a patent. You have to change it. You can't be infringing on the patent to do that. However, from a starting standpoint, you can learn a lot from those formulas just from the patents. So, now, in a patent, what requires them to do is give some example formulas, so you can get a pretty good starting formula there. You can just search U.S. patents by going to the uspto.gov website, or even better, you could just search Google patents. Of course, you're going to have to change a formula because you can't infringe, but it's a great starting place. Another source for getting clues about ingredient levels is chemical supplier information. One of the most helpful things the raw material suppliers do is they give us suggested use levels and also suggested starting formulas. Of course, these formulas are usually packed with high amounts of that supplier's ingredients, but these are still an excellent place to start. A couple of suppliers who have good starting formulas. Crota does a good job. Steppen does a good job. BASF, excellent job of giving formulas. So when you're looking for those are some good sources. And for home crafters, makingcosmetics.com, they have some pretty good starting formulas also. Now, note these are only starting formulas. They're not. I'm going to the market for the formulas. You have to still create prototypes and adjust ingredients. You can also find relative levels ingredients by looking through some of these cosmetic science books. Harry's Cosmeticology is an excellent one. It's listed right there. The Handbook of Cosmetic Science and Technology, the Chemistry and Manufacture of Cosmetics, all excellent places. Now, if you can't afford to purchase books, you can also look on Google Books for some of these things. Just go to Google Books and type the search term for the type of formula that you want. Other sources are online sources, happy.com, Cosmetics and Toiletries. They have a bench reference online. UL Prospector has a ton of starting supplier formulas. So getting a sense of these supplier formulas will give you a sense of like how much of these ingredients do you have to include. Getting back to our Feek example, we are now ready to take a guess at the formula percentages might be. So for water, this is just QS, which QS means quotient sum. It's Latin, but it means that you just add enough of whatever's left to make the whole thing add up to 100%. Okay, so if all these together added up to 80%, the water level would be 20%, so the whole thing should always add to 100%. Next, we're going to look at three primary surfactants. I know shampoos typically have between 15 to 20% surfactants, right? So we'll have to guess that these three surfactants make up about that much. Now, I'm just going to guess here. I'll say the cocoa S-ethionate is 8%, SLS 6%, SLES 6%, and the betaine in that case, my guess for this one is 5%. And that way we have a ratio of a 1-to-5 ratio of the primary surfactants to secondary surfactants. Now, I should say this is just a guess, but it's a good starting place. And when you're formulating from ingredient lists, you can only guess. You don't know exactly the formula. It's just a guess. Now, we also have to figure out that sodium chloride levels, I'm just going to say 1.5% as a start, but you can actually do a salt curve analysis. A salt curve analysis just looks at the concentration of salt versus the viscosity, and it tells you how thick you can get it with the amount of salt. So salt can be anywhere from 1% to 2% in a formula, so I just say it's about 1.5% as a start. The lauryl glucoside and the stearyl citrate, they go in at about 1% levels, and this is actually an opacifying blend, and so that's about the level that we can say. So about 1%. Incidentally, you can get a free formulation spreadsheet by going to that link listed there. Now, before we move on, it's worth mentioning that while the ingredient list can tell you the basic raw materials, there is still a lot you don't know if you only have the LOI. For example, you won't know the specific supplier of a material, and that does matter. Just because one supplier will supply you with sodium lauryl sulfate, that doesn't mean it's exactly the same sodium lauryl sulfate as supplied from another supplier. Another thing, you won't know whether an ingredient is part of a blend. I do know the formula, and I know in this case, the lauryl glucoside and the stearyl citrate, they are actually a blend. But if I was just looking at the ingredient list, I really wouldn't know that that was part of a blend. Another issue is that you won't know whether the raw material is a concentrated version or not. It doesn't matter as far as the list of ingredient goes, but when you're putting together the formula, you could be using a higher concentrated ingredient, a more ethoxylated ingredient, that sort of thing that you might just not know. So creating formulas from LOIs, it does require a lot of guessing, a lot of experimenting. And just knowing the technique, though, is not going to likely allow you to copy somebody's formula exactly. And that's a good thing. If you're a formulator and you've come up with this nice formula, you don't want it to just be simply copied, just simply. However, you as a formulator, you can get pretty close, and you can learn a lot by creating formulas just based on ingredient lists. All right, on to the next step in formulating. the cosmetics is getting your raw materials. When I worked at a company, it was pretty easy to get raw materials that I needed for making cosmetic formulas. I would just look up the raw material, contact the salesperson, and I knew from the company, and to just get a sample. Within a day or two, I'd have that sample waiting for me. And if that was a material that my company already used, well, then we had a few thousand in inventory. I could just, contact our ingredient person at the plant, which was actually quite a challenge, and just get a sample from them. It was actually a bit complicated, but I knew samples were on the way. Now though that I don't work for a corporation and I'm independent, it's a little bit more challenging to get raw materials. Um, in fact, it can be challenging just to even find out that there are new ingredients. So here are some ideas about getting samples. You can order samples from suppliers. You still can. Going through UL Prospector or Node.com. That's kind of a new one on the block, as it were. You can also meet salespeople at Society of Cosmetic Chemists meetings from different companies. Go to trade shows. We just had a trade show called Teamworks here in Chicago. In Cosmetics just happened in Amsterdam last week. Coming up is New York Suppliers Day, which happens in May. So there are these trade shows where raw material suppliers show their wares. They also give out samples. And so it's a great place for you to get some sampling ingredients. And you can also buy ingredients. You can buy ingredients on UL Prospector, or I'm sorry, you can buy ingredients from Amazon, through eBay, makingcosmetics.com. There's a variety of places to get ingredients. Unfortunately, there's no simple place where you said, just go here and you can get any ingredient. That doesn't exist. Of course, that doesn't exist even for people in the industry. So it's getting raw materials can sometimes be challenging. But once you get all the raw materials, you're ready for the next step, making your prototypes. Now, when you're working from an ingredient list, you not only have to guess the levels of ingredients, but you also have to guess the procedure. So if you have a sample of the formula, you can test it for things like pH and viscosity. So you don't have to guess at the specifications. So that's why it's nice to have those information. Now, we've already gone through and figure out an approximate starting point for the ingredients. Now we have to figure out the procedure. So for a shampoo, this is pretty easy. It's pretty much a procedure to start with the water, which is the largest volume ingredient. You heat it up a little bit. That makes it go faster. Then if there are any powders that you want to add, you add those powders. Now, in our formula, we didn't have any powders. The stearyl citrate could be sold as a powder, but that's usually sold as a blend, so it's a liquid. And when you're adding the ingredients, it's good to heat it up to about 40 C, and that just blends things together nice and easy. Here are some other tips that you might consider depending on the type of formula that you have. First, so you start with whatever ingredient is the highest concentration, and then you add other ingredients to that, right? So water is our highest concentration. You can start with all the water and then add ingredients to that. You don't want to start with a small amount of volume ingredients and then start adding, the bigger amounts on top of that in most cases. Now, if you're making an emulsion, you're going to want to make the water phase system and an oil phase system, and you want to heat those up. And you usually want to combine an emulsion at about 75 C. This makes sure that you're above the melting point of, any of the waxes you might be using. So it's important to do that. For oil-soluble ingredients in a water system, then you want to use a solubilizer. So if you're putting in fragrances, things, you want to make sure you use a solubilizer. And you want to put fragrances and preservatives in at temperatures below 40 C just to make sure that they don't break down. Now, when you're making your batch, before you make your batch, you want to figure out like what size should you do. I've seen people create batches that are 100 grams, and I just don't think the 100 grams is a good choice to do, especially if you're trying to copy some formula off an ingredient list. You want to make 200 grams or 300 grams for sure. And also, when you're making a formula, just a prototype, remember to include a preservative. I know preservatives are not included in that starting formula, which has the list of the most important ingredients. But you do want to include a preservative in any of your prototypes just so the products are safe. You also want to include pH adjustment ingredients, your acids and your bases, just to make sure that you can adjust the pH to the level that you want. These things are, they're below 1% line ingredients, but they are still important in the final characteristics of the product. So make sure that you use that preservative, use the pH adjustments. And now, um, there are a number of prototyping skills that you can learn. So this is developing a formula from an ingredient list, but there are a number of things that you can also learn as a formulator. Evaluating raw materials, what do they do? Figuring out cost savings, finding replacement materials, doing scale up, improving manufacture. These are all different type prototyping skills that we teach in the practical cosmetic formulating course. But as far as just getting into the lab and mixing ingredients together, you can follow the suggestions that I just gave there. All right, that moves on to our once we've created the first prototype. You want to make sure you test it for quality control measures. So for products like a shampoo, you want to test the pH and the viscosity. And since we are knocking off a formula, it's a simple matter of just seeing how close we are to the product sample, right? If the basic characteristics are off a little bit, you can usually adjust the batch until it comes within the specifications. So if the pH is too low, for example, you can add some base, maybe some sodium hydroxide, and that's going to raise the pH level. If the pH level is too high, you can add an acid, like maybe a citric acid. Citric acid can bring the pH level lower. And so having those adjustment ingredients are important to make the batch come within the specifications that are required. Now, if the basic characteristics are a little bit off, feel free to adjust them in the specifications. Now, after letting the batch equilibrate overnight, you can run some performance tests to see if the prototype performs as it should. Now, usually you have to have some standard tests that you run to compare to the benchmark. And those were the standard tests that we did in step 2 in picking our benchmark. For a shampoo, you run foam tests, in-shower tests, and trust tests. Next is refining your products. If the product doesn't match the benchmark, then you have to make some refinements to the ingredient levels or to the ingredients that you've used. The specific changes that you want to make depends on the shortcomings of that specific prototype. Now, this can be a long process. I once shampooed my head over 1,500 times. Yes, I was the most shampooed head in America in 2005 because I was working on a prototype. And I believe that you should try every prototype. I was working on a number of prototypes, evaluating a lot of raw materials. But if you're just trying to duplicate a formula, you could probably do it in about 6 to 12 attempts. That many attempts should get you pretty close. Now, in a shampoo formula, so if you are adjusting something, so if you wanted to add more detergent or you wanted to take more detergent away, the volume that you have to replace, you can just adjust whatever the water is. That's why in the water we just put QS, because if you add like another extra percentage of sodium lauryl sulfate, for example, you would take 1% away from the water. So whenever you're doing something like that, the adjustment comes in the ingredient that's the most abundant in the formula, and typically that's water. So after lots of refining and testing, we finally get to a reasonably finished formula, starting with the ingredient list. It leads to this starting formula, which ultimately leads to close to a finished formula. Now, I would say close to. There's still a lot of refining that you need to be done. For example, you need to match the color. You need to match the fragrance. Additionally, you want to match exactly I mean, if you want to match exactly, you're going to need to add some of those feature ingredients. And so this can actually require a lot of prototypes. And once you're all done with that, you want to do some more formal testing, stability testing, microbial challenge tests, products tests, consumer tests. But at this point, you're going to be really close to having a finished formula. All right, there you have it. That was just an overview of the process of starting with an ingredient list and creating a finished product. Um, this shampoo example, well, it was relatively easy, but the principles I laid out here can be used for almost any kind of cosmetic formula. In summary, first we got the lab set up to create the product. Next, we picked the benchmark, and from the list, when we got the list of ingredients, then we created our first prototype after analyzing the ingredient list. We got the required raw materials, made our prototypes, and then finally we did some prototype testing and refined it until we had a reasonably finished product. Now, incidentally, this list here from the FDA.gov gives you some good resources for some good advice for people who have their own labs or are home formulators. And it's good for people in industry to read too. Great information about setting up a lab, following GMPs, and sort of the things that you're required to do to create a formula and sell it in the United States. All right, so that brings us to the end. And hopefully you got a good sense of how you start from an ingredient list and create a formula. But before we get to answering questions, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Practical Cosmetic Formulating course. The Practical Cosmetic Formulating course, I created it when I got into the industry, right? And what I found was that there wasn't a lot of information for new people in the industry. And none of the stuff that you learned in college really applies to creating formulas, to formulating. They teach you more about being a professor than they do about a formulator. So that's why I created the Practical Cosmetic Formulating course. This was created for people who are science majors or industry chemists or salespeople that come into the industry. Anyone interested in learning how to make cosmetics, personal care products, would benefit from taking this course. And by completing this course, you're going to know how to create nearly any kind of cosmetic formula. It'll help you develop the skills to understand exactly how you go about creating these formulas. Now, the course is a 9-module course. We have product development, cosmetic science, so how these things work. We talk about raw materials, specifically the different types of raw materials. We give you specific formulation types. We talk about lab techniques. There's a whole thing on scale up and product testing. Now you can also get any formulation question answered. There are additional resources of like where you get raw materials, what kind of books you want to read, and where you can get other questions answered. We have some free bonus books and videos. You get access to these webinars. We have other webinars we've done specifically on preservation, on regulations. These are things that were paid webinars, but you can get them for free bringing in the course. We have quizzes. There is a certificate of completion once you go through all the modules and quizzes. And you get to learn in the way that's best for you. We have lessons in audio, in video. You can download them. You can listen to them. The courses, it's all whatever you want. And I'm always available to answer questions. So the thing is that I really do have a passion for teaching. I've been teaching formulation, over 20 years now. And I just really like it. It's fun for me to see people learn how to do things, learn to make decisions, learn to create great products. And I've already we've had over 850 people go through this course already. But Maley says, I think the training course is great, covers a wide range of topics, and is very organized with streaming videos, PowerPoints, formula files. She's very excited about the course. Jill says she highly recommends the course. I still keep in contact with Jill. She's a formulator out in Georgia. But the classes are a good mix of information, which was found invaluable. Eric says, I'm learning a lot of new things. They don't cover this stuff in school. That's right. You don't really get this in college when you're doing that. Now, since you're on this webinar special, I'm offering a free 15-minute one-on-one call for anyone who registers through this webinar special. This also, I'm actually working on uh, revamping a lot of the course, which I'm going to add later, and anybody who joins now will be part of that. But you also have lifetime access to the material. So once you join it, you can get access to this material. There is no time limit to when you got to finish, no time limit to when you stop having access. So you can do that. There's also a money back guarantee, of course. If you start the course and you don't like it for whatever reason, just let me know. I'll give you your money back. No questions. It's just like, really, it's important for me that you learn. It's important for me that you get value out of it too. I don't want you to buy something that you didn't find valuable. Just another webinar special is we don't usually have this, but we'll have a payment plan. So instead of one bulk payment, you can do a 3 or 4 payment plan there. And that's practical cosmetic formulation, that you learn to create beauty products. And I am Perry Romanowski, and we're going to get to questions. Thank you. Let's see here. Stop sharing my screen. All right, I'm back. So there you are. Thank you, everyone who has been on. Hopefully there weren't any technical glitches. Sometimes that happens. I've actually gone through a whole webinar and didn't know there was a technical glitch, and I had to redo the video. But hopefully there wasn't that. Hopefully you've also been putting questions down as I've gone through, and I'm going to go through and answer some of those. Now, first I might need a little drink here. Whew. All right, let's see if you've had any questions. Maybe there were no questions, but according to my counsel, we have 76 questions. All right, if you don't mind, I'm going to put on my glasses so I can see a little better. All right, let's start heading through some of these questions. I should mention that we had people send in some questions. So previous to the webinar, we had some questions sent in. So I'm going to also take a look at those. I'm all about answering questions. I really need to get a faster computer. Okay. Here is a question. This question comes from Kathy. Kathy asks, hi Perry, my question is on proper product labeling for cosmetic natural cosmetics. Is it legal to add descriptions to the INCI names, such as, XXX is derived from plants, squalane sugar, glycerin is non-GMO, that kind of thing? No, it's not legal to add such descriptions. The LOI is not really supposed to be a place for marketing. Now, you can talk about your ingredients in your label copy around, but you talk about it there, talk about it below, talk about it in the front. But this ingredient list, it's the LOI it's not supposed to be for marketing. The LOI is only supposed to be for people who might have allergies to certain ingredients, and it makes it easier for them to find. Putting that extra information in parentheses, it's not legal, and it actually could cause the FDA to contact you about selling a misbranded cosmetic. I know there are companies out there that do this, but they're not following the regulations, and really they risk legal action, in my opinion. So it's not in the rules. Experts will tell you not to do it. I know some companies do it. I don't recommend that you do it. Okay. And the next question here. This question comes from Pam. Pam says, I'd love more information on determining what an active ingredient is within a cosmetic or skincare formula. If a formula has an active ingredient, wouldn't these actives be considered drugs? That's a great question. When it comes to cosmetics, people are using the term active ingredient in kind of a wrong way. So let me explain. active ingredients are really something from an over-the-counter drug. When you're talking about products classified as OTC or over-the-counter drugs, the active ingredients are the ingredients that make the product work. So, you know, that would be the functional ingredients in these products, and they have FDA monographs. So things like dandruff shampoos or fluoride toothpaste or antiperspirants. If you look on the back of the labels of those things, they say percent, they say active ingredient, and they say the percent. That's the way that those are legally supposed to be labeled. So those are not cosmetics, those are over the counter drugs. When you're talking about cosmetic products, the term active ingredient actually doesn't apply, because if it was an active ingredient, it'd be a drug. But I know marketers use that. If a cosmetic has an active ingredient that can actually change the biochemistry of the skin or otherwise interfere with normal skin biology, then that would be a misbranded drug. Cosmetics are not actually allowed to have drug effects, despite the way that they're marketed. So, in the cosmetic terms, the term active ingredient is a marketing term for an ingredient that people believe has some effect, but it's not legally allowed to have that effect. For example, some marketers say vitamin C is an active ingredient for skin lightening. And while there may be some lab studies to show that this ingredient may have an effect, it's not an approved ingredient for skin lightening here in the United States. So it really can't be considered an active ingredient. In fact, if it has that effect, it would likely be seen as a misbranded drug. So basically, there is no such thing as an active ingredient in a cosmetic. If a product has an active ingredient, it's a drug. To figure out what is being considered the active ingredient in a cosmetic, because I know marketers talk about active ingredients, you just have to look at the marketing, look at their ingredient list, and see what they consider the active ingredient. All right, we're just going to go through some questions here. The first question we got, we already answered that, but here is a question we got early on from Juliana. Juliana asks, can you talk about or give us some tips on how to choose a preservative system for our formula? What should we keep in mind? What kind of resources are there online to help us choose preservatives? It's a great question. So from a preservative standpoint, and we've done a whole webinar on preservatives, we covered in the course, but as far as choosing a preservative, if first, you should always include a preservative. I know there's this advice out there, out in the internet world, that if you have an anhydrous formula, you don't need to add a preservative. I respectfully disagree with that. There's no downside to adding preservatives. There are some people who might be allergic to certain preservatives, but for the most part, people are not sensitive to preservatives. And preservatives do such a good in the formula. They prevent people from contracting diseases or getting eye irritation or damage. So you should always include a preservative. So the reason you don't really have to in an anhydrous system is because if there's no water, the microbe can't grow. But if there's no water in your formula, you don't have to worry about it. However, when people are using products, maybe their hand's wet and they dip it into the product and that water gets into your product. And so microbes could then get a foothold there and start growing there. And so this is why you'd include something, probably the best in an anhydrous is something like a propylparaben that can work at the surface. It could interface at the water and prevent contamination. As far as sources online for choosing preservatives, UL Prospector has a number. If you look at preservatives, it has a number of those, and the suppliers of those preservatives give you all sorts of information about when you can use a blend, what type of formula to use it. So I'd encourage you to contact the supplier directly on any specific formula. Now, when I'm talking about suppliers, I'm not talking about like the home crafter suppliers. What I'm more talking about is the actual chemical suppliers that supply even the home crafter supplier or distributors. They get all of their ingredients from companies like Croda, Stepan, BASF, all the bigger companies. And you can go directly to those companies and learn about the preservative systems. So that's the advice there. We maybe I'll do the webinar on preservatives again. I'm always looking for topics on preservatives, so we'll do that next. All right, we got there we go. A little technical glitch there. Okay. Next up, we have Shez from the UK. He says, I'd like to know a bit more about bright hair dye pigments in vegan dyes. Um, if I think about it, like nearly every dye would be considered vegan because they either come from minerals, which are not animal based, or they come from plants, which are there. The only ingredient that doesn't come, the only approved dye that doesn't come from, or that does come from animals, would be cochineal, which is the red. It comes from the beetles. So as long as you avoid that, they're all dyes. So I'm not exactly sure on that question, but hopefully that was helpful. Okay, next question we have here. Do I need a viscometer to make lipsticks? Actually, a viscometer is not going to be very helpful if you're making lipsticks. The thing is, lipsticks are solid products, and viscometers are really more for liquid products or gel products. As far as a solid goes, no. You probably, if you're making just lipsticks, you probably don't need that. You do have to find some way to measure the hardness of your lipstick. We used to use this thing called a penetration meter, which you drop. It dropped a weight from a certain height, and then you could measure how far into the thing it went, and that gives you a measure of the softness. But that's not a viscometer. So no, you don't need a viscometer for lipstick. If you're on a tiny budget, can you recommend a cheaper type mixer? We actually, if you go into our forum and click on the resources button, we do have a list of possible mixer types there for people who can't afford an expensive mixer. So I direct you there. Does a lipstick have a pH, and what should the pH be? No, lipsticks don't have pH. Lipsticks are anhydrous products. Anhydrous products don't really have a pH, so no, that wouldn't be a measure there. Rosa asks why pH strips are not recommended to measure pH. Well, the reason is that the pH strips, first, they just like change color. So it relies on your eyeball to be looking at the right color, matching the right color to see if it's in the right range. But second of all, it also requires like a chemical reaction to happen, and that can vary based on the other things in your formula. So it's just not reliable. As far as a pH meter to buy, we actually, again, in our forum in the resources section, we have a list for like a pH meter. And boy, you can get a pH meter, for $25. You can get a cheap one, which is going to be better than the strips. It's not going to be a great pH meter for if you want to be in production. Those, couple $100 for something like that. However, it's going to be makes your formulation much more accurate, much more reliable, much more repeatable. Like I said, pH strips, those are for like a high school chemistry course to get like an approximate, is this acid, is this base? It's really not proper for formulating. Next question comes from Ronnie. For my small labs, which viscometer do you recommend for gels? The standard viscometer in the cosmetic industry is the Brookfield viscometer, and I would recommend that. They have a thing called a heliopath for, especially if you're using gels. For a heliopath, this stand sort of slowly goes down, and then the probe goes into the gel, and so you can get a better viscosity for the gel. One of the problems with gels is if you start spinning it, it starts to get thinner as it spins around, and so you don't get as quite an accurate thing. But I would recommend the Brookfield viscometer. Okay, Marita asks, I live in Ecuador and I have a small bio cosmetic line, and I want to create shampoo, conditioner, and other products 100% free of chemicals, or at least using safe synthetics. Uh, Everything's a chemical, so that would be impossible. But you have to define what you mean by chemical. Safe synthetics. Most of the ingredients, in fact, I would say all of the ingredients in the INCI dictionary are considered safe for use for cosmetics. Do you have a list, maybe a website where I can find that information? We, on Chemist Corner, we do have that kind of information, but I need a little more specific question there. But okay, can you talk about calculating active materials in surfactants? It's a good question. Typically, surfactants are sold instead of sold as powders, which are 100%, they're sold as solutions. So you could buy sodium lauryl sulfate, for example, as a 28% solution or a 30% solution. And so the way to calculate how much are you using is by calculating that percentage. So if you saw in that formula there, I used 8% of sodium cocoaethionate. Now 8% is the percent act, right? So you need eight. You want 8 grams per 100 grams of that ingredient. Now, if you have supplied something that is 30% active, so I have this 30% solution. So in there is 3 grams for every 100 that I take. I'm only going to have 3 grams. Now I got to figure out how am I going to get 8 grams out of that. So if you want to get an 8%, so you do 8% divided by 30%, and that's going to give you the level that you're supposed to use in that formula. Use my calculator here. 8 divided by 30% equals. So if you wanted to get 8% active of a 30% solution, you'd want 26.7% for that one. So it's probably easier to communicate through email on that one, but that's essentially how you do percent active material. We have a whole section of that in our course. Don asks, where can I buy a hot plate with time and temperature controls? We do have a list of that. Go to our resources section in the forum. Typically you can get a hot plate through Amazon. They have some great things there. eBay is another source to get that. It really depends on where you're located, but you can get a decent hot plate there. Sally says, I'm trying to formulate a shampoo to be sold at Whole Foods. They do not allow quats or pegs. Do you know why? Yes, I do know why, because Whole Foods has a list of banned ingredients, and those ingredients just happen to be on their banned list. We go through this in our naturals version of the Practical Cosmetic Formulating course, but that is why they have created, Whole Foods has created this natural standard. And on that natural standard, they list about, I think the last I saw, they had 600 ingredients listed that you're not allowed to use. Quats and pegs are in there. So as if a natural formulator, you just have to go look at that list and say, I've got to make formulas, but I can't use anything on these lists. And that's how you formulate naturally. Anna says, and how can I replace some ingredients? For example, I don't want to use sulfates. Should I use SCI, sodium cocoa isothionate? Yeah, you can use SCI as a replacement for sulfates. You can use torates as a replacement for sulfates. You can use glucosides. There are a number of things. You use a number of anionic detergents as a substitute for sulfates. Now, you can't expect, though, if you're substituting an ingredient, to get exactly a replica of the formula you're trying to replicate. They just have different characteristics. So you'll have to modify your formula to try to match what you get out of a sulfate. The reason sulfates are used is that they're highly functional, they foam pretty well, and they're cheap. So there's always a downside when you're using something that's like a sulfate, but it's usually going to be more expensive. Maybe it doesn't foam as well. Maybe it doesn't clean as well or feel as well. And so that's a trade-off. But that's as a formulator, that's the kind of the trade-off that you have to do. Okay, Crystal Lynn says, what is a good primary surfactant for a natural shampoo or body wash? No sulfates, MEA, or DEA. You're right, those MEA, DEA sulfates, those are not typically found in natural. Although I should say for sulfates, some natural standards like Cosmos will allow cocoa sulfate, for example. It's cocoa, so it's coconut. Although you could use sodium lauryl sulfate as long as it's derived from coconut or palm sources. So if it's plant derived, you could use a sulfate. But if your natural consumer probably doesn't want the word sulfate in their ingredient list. So one of the main things used is glucosides, decyl glucoside, lauryl glucoside. Those are the things that are used for natural cleansing products like shampoos and body washes. Carrie says, I'm an esthetician. I already use madeincosmetics.com. What are the regulations on purchasing from chemical suppliers? Do I need a different certificate or degree to purchase from other chemical suppliers? No, you don't necessarily. You don't need a certificate or a degree to purchase from chemical suppliers. You do have to have a business. They're not going to send ingredients to somebody's house. But if you're a business and you can establish yourself as a business, you can usually work with suppliers, and they'll send you. You can purchase things right from them. Now, the one challenge about purchasing from chemical suppliers is that you often have to buy a large amount of a chemical. Depends on the supplier, but the bigger suppliers require you to buy more. So if you're not going to use a 55-gallon drum of sodium cocoa isoethionate, you might not be able to buy it from Stepan. Although I think they probably sell 5-gallon pails, so you can get some. But these big companies want to work with big customers. That's why you have places like makingcosmetics.com. But you just need to be a business. You don't need any certificate or special degree. Although it helps to get the information we have in our course. Don asks where to buy a double boiler. Is there a double boiler with temperature control? I cannot find such on a Google search. A double boiler, that's really more of a cooking thing. It's not a thing I recommend using. For formulating, you should use hot plates. You can use like a steel water bath and put your container in there. Double boiler, I can't help there. Elad says, can I use TEA for a pH adjustment? Yeah, TEA is a base. So if you want to increase the pH of a system, then you can use TEA. Of course, it depends on the system, but yeah, TEA can be used for that. Next, we have Aurora asks, how can I find more about the practical cosmetic formulation course? I gave the link. The link is chemistcorner.com/webinar-special, and you can find more information there. Sorry. All right, here's my microphone here. It's always important to be mic'd up well. All right, we're just answering questions. We had the webinar. The webinar went from 10 to 11. It's 11:15 now, and I'm just answering questions. So if you have questions, I'll keep answering. We got a ton more questions. I'm just going through them as I can. Now, if I don't get to your question, I'll follow up with an email to answer those questions. Okay, Stephanie says, oh, I thought it started 11 Central Time. So sorry, Stephanie. It was recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later. But you did have a question. Let's see. I've had the same formula for a facial cream for years, oil and water emulsion. I started adding panthenol, and all of a sudden I'm getting mold. This is before I add preservative. I'm just curious why you think this happens. Well, it's likely that well, you could be using a panthenol that is contaminated. It's got spheres in there, microbial spheres, but it's probably that the preservative system you have is not robust enough. It's probably even without adding the panthenol, it was maybe just on the cusp of being good enough. And when you add something like panthenol, which is essentially more food for microbes, because microbes can eat panthenol, it's also going to be a source of contamination. You could have microbes that are, just the spores living in that panthenol. So unless you've sterilized the panthenol, that could be a problem too. So it's not surprising. That's why it happens. I would recommend getting a better preservative system um, in that system, because obviously, if just adding something as simple as panthenol is causing mold, your preservative system is just not robust enough. You need to add more preservatives. Okay, Carrie asks, where is the best place to find information on trade shows? Let's see, happy.com has that. The Society of Cosmetic Chemists, secconline.org, is a great place for trade show information. Cosmetics and Toiletries, they post trade show information. So there's a number of GCI has trade show information. So those are a number of different sources. Blessing says, can you please give us the link to the FDA resources on how to set up a lab? Uh, it was in that last slide that I was on. But yeah, I'll send that directly to you. I'll keep that there. Lona asks, how do you know if your ingredients can react with each other? Thank you. The interesting thing when you go through chemistry in college, uh, it's all about chemical reactions. You're mixing this together and that together, and you hope it reacts and forms some new thing. It's kind of cool. When you get into formulating, you actually don't want anything to react. There are very few cosmetics that actually are reactions. And so, for the most part, raw materials don't have a lot of interaction with each other. They don't react. Now, things like acids will react with bases, so you don't want to mix acids and bases. You also don't want to mix cationic ingredients in general with anionic ingredients, so positively charged ingredients with negatively charged ingredients. Those will usually react to combine out. uh, that's really the only general clues that we have. Anything else would be more specific ingredients. You say, hey, does that react with that? For example, the effect of a paraben can be negated by the use of a non-ionic, like a polysorbate 20 or something like that. So you shouldn't mix those together. But there is no simple list of all those things. You just develop that over time. Interactions. So and sometimes there are interactions that happen that we don't even know about. It's a more complicated question than you you might realize there. But those are just some clues there. Uh, let's see. Mark says, which websites are for facial creams ingredient? Is there any specific? I mean, there are a number of places where you get starting formulas for making facial creams, but there's no website that says this is the facial cream ingredient website. In our course, I believe we have included a formula for a facial cream. It would be in the skincare section. If not, I can of course provide one. But there are a number of places for free formulations. Like I said, check out UL Prospector has a number of free formulations. Happy.com has formulations. These are starting formulations. But as far as like what goes in this facial cream, uh, a lot of things, some emollients, some oils, some film formers, solvents, humectants, those sorts of things. It really depends on what you want the facial cream to do. Matt asks, is there a natural formulation course as well? Yes, we have actually a general formulation course, and then we have a more specific natural formulating course. The natural formulating course, you would get more out of that if you had a background in formulating. That was our last webinar was about natural formulating. So, and in the future we'll do that too. But yes, we do have a natural formulation course. Reza says, if I want to produce and sell shampoo in my neighborhood in California, will I need to get a permit? Well, I don't know all the permitting requirements in California, so I would suggest you contact your local chamber of commerce. But as far as regulations go, as long as you're following the FDA regulations and you're following good manufacturing procedures, GMP, you don't need a special permit to sell cosmetic products, and I don't think you need one in California. But your neighborhood might have some special requirements if you're going to set up a place where you're essentially a chemical factory. So you have to check on that for your local government. Neo says, will the recording be available for download? Yes, the recording will be available for replay. um Tina says, if you have a shampoo or conditioner for more than 2 years because you're not sold it, how can you be sure that it's still good? That's a great question. Typically, shampoos and conditioners, they'll last for, well, at least 1 year. You do 1 year stability. But as far as are they good for 2 years? Well, that depends on what you mean by good. If they meet specifications, if they smell good, if the color's right, then they're probably good for 2 years. So after 2 years, if you check the formula or the product and you say, does it smell right? Does it perform right? Does it still pass microbial challenge tests? Right color? It's still good. And so the specification sheet is really what tells you whether the product is still good. And shampoos, I had a shampoo that lasted uh, probably 7 years before it separated. But ultimately you really don't want products to be more than a year old, but it does happen. So I don't specifically check your specifications to see if it's still good. um, Mary asks if there's a replay. Yes, we'll have a replay. um, Jenny says, what is the best way for a home formulator to measure viscosity? Thank you. Well, this is a good question. The best way is to get a Brookfield viscometer. That's the best way. Now, if you don't have a Brookfield viscometer, the best thing you can do is get a relative viscosity. And a relative viscosity, let's see if I can do a demo here. All right, I got this board, got a viscosity, and another product. Okay, I'm going to show you. You can do a relative viscosity. Now, this isn't a viscosity measurement, but it is a relative viscosity measurement. Just to give you an idea. So, if you had a benchmark, you take a surface and you get a specific angle of the surface, and you can put a sample on it. And now you could measure the speed at which this liquid at this angle goes a certain distance. And so give that a measure of a viscosity, right? Now, so you say something like this. Now you start at the same spot, and you can see that one, it moves more slowly. So it has a higher viscosity. And so you could set up a scale like this to measure, you know, different viscosities based on a specific angle, a type of surface, and a relative measurement. Now, that's not, it's a great way if you're formulating and you're experimenting, it's a great way to say, is this really thicker? Can we put a number to it? But if you want to sell products, really, you need to get a proper viscometer for measuring. Okay. Emmanuel says, if I want to make a duplication of a body lotion, how will I get the original formulation? Uh, Well, ultimately, you might not be able to get the original formulation. Formulas are typically uh, proprietary information. But if you have the ingredient list and you get a sample of the formula and you can characterize it with viscosity, pH, odor, and functionality, that's how you can duplicate it. You can never know the original formula unless you created it yourself. Mohammed asks, can I start a small cosmetic startup in India, initially manufacturing from an artesian laboratory, and I'm based in India? Unfortunately, Mohammed, I don't know the laws in India, so I can't help you there. I would suggest you contact the Society of Cosmetic Chemists in India, and they might have that answer for you. Uh, Orbala asks, can you heat surfactants? When I formulate shampoos, I have not yet heated the formulations with surfactants. Why is that relevant? So the answer is yes, you can heat surfactants. Your surfactants are stable up, pretty hot. Over 100 C. So as long as there's water, you have no problem there. So yes, you can heat surfactants. The reason to heat the surfactant, you don't necessarily have to. It just makes them blend more easily. It makes the products flow more easily. So it can speed up your production. So that's why you would heat up your surfactants when you're making them. Tammy says, how do I determine the SPF of a product? There is a specific protocol you have to follow to determine the SPF of a product. It involves putting a sample on a specific section of skin and then running a test with UV light and then having a dermatologist grade that and such. So the reality is, this isn't something you can do at home. You have to send these out and have a professional lab determine the SPF value of your products. So, Margaret says, I'm interested in butters and oils and essential oil mixtures for African American hair care. Does your course touch on this information? Yeah, we do cover that information, not in depth. If the practical cosmetic formulating course is, it's not specific like hair care. It's like the whole ball of wax. And so we do have a section on butters and oils and things. But if you're specifically looking for that information, uh, you might be disappointed with the depth that we go in there. However, if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer any questions and can expand any areas that are important to you. Uh, Tola asks, can I ask about sunscreens? Yeah, I guess you can. I would suggest you put it in our forum, but if you had a question, you can send it in. Okay, Naimas asks, my question is, if we have an LOI of over 40 ingredients, is it possible that this amount of ingredients in a product? That's a great question. Yes, it is possible there are that many ingredients in the formula, but no, it is not possible that those 40 ingredient matters. Whenever you see that many ingredients, 40 ingredients in a list of ingredients, whenever you see that many ingredients, what's happening is the company is just putting any ingredient there in there that sounds like it would make a good marketing story at some point, and it's not actually having an effect. So what happens is you can buy a blend of natural extracts, and it can be a blend of everything. You take a dropper full, you drop it in there, and then you get your then you can put it on the list of ingredients. But no, there is no way an ingredient list that has 40 ingredients that every one of those 40 ingredients matter. Just no way. Ingredient lists are from 10, probably the most 20 ingredients where it really matters, but 40 ingredients, no. Crystal says, Perry, thanks for the great webinar. You're welcome. Quick question. How do you get around the ethics of knocking off someone else's formulas if you are intending to make money from it? Is it just not that it's not exact? This is a great question, Crystal. A few people have asked me this privately, but so here's my thought. The the formula. I mean, first of all, formulas are not. Um, uh, if it's not patented, then anybody can use a formula. Um, so you can copy. There is no legal reason you couldn't copy someone's formula unless they have a um, a patent on it, and then you can't infringe on the patent. But if your formula works like someone else's formula, or you're knocking off someone's formula and you want to intend to make money from it, the reality is that cosmetics that are successful are not successful because of the formula. They really aren't. Cosmetics are successful because of the marketing. Right now, you can make, in fact, Procter and Gamble. If you wanted to make Pantene, you can license Procter and Gamble's formula. They'll give you the formula. I mean, you got to pay for it, and it's a lot, but they will give you that formula. And why would they do that? Why would they give you that formula? It's because they know that the success of a product is not because of the formula, it's because of the marketing and the story that goes along with it. um, the products, the consumers are just not that good at telling the difference between products. You could give somebody 10 different formulas and they might not see a difference. I actually had a formula where I took the VO5 shampoo formula, which is the most basic of shampoos, and then I took our best moisturizing formula and I made them look the same and smell the same and have the same viscosity. So they looked and smelled and the same. Now, from my mind, they didn't perform anywhere nearly the same, but I gave it to a panelist of 15 people. And of those 15 people, only one person was able to tell that they were different formulas. And so uh, the reality is consumers don't know. They're not very good at determining differences. So when you're talking about your formula and knocking off someone else's formula, uh, if you made the exact same formula, you're not going to be successful. You just aren't. The only thing that's going to make you successful in selling products and making money is if you have a good marketing story. And if your marketing story is this, I'm just copying somebody else's, good luck with that. Yeah, I don't think you're going to be successful. The other thing is when you're knocking off someone's formula like this, y- you don't know who their suppliers are. You don't know their manufacturing procedure. Uh, and there are, you don't know their whole production thing, or whether they use blends, how much it costs them to make. And so no, your formula, it's unlikely that unless you have the exact formula, it's unlikely that you're ever going to make exactly their formula. Now that's the world according to me. But like I said, whether you find it unethical or not to formulate like this, if you find it unethical, then don't do it. However, even if you find it unethical, it's a great way to learn how to formulate. So if you want to learn how to make a shampoo, uh, you know, follow follow the procedure I talked out here. Or if you want to learn to make a skin lotion, the only way that we learn is by emulating other people. So that's my thoughts there. Jacqueline says, when choosing a course, what would you say the number one consideration of the course? So why should you take this course? All right, there are a number of cosmetic formulating courses out there. Yeah, there definitely are. It's easy to find them. I would say take this course because it's taught by me, and I know what I know, and I have successfully taught a lot of people over the years, and in a way that is understandable to people with a wide variety of backgrounds. And I am interested in you learning. So if you go through my course, you don't learn, and you want a refund, or it's not, or you're not getting what you want, I have no problem with that. The most important thing for me is that you learn what you want to learn and you get it out of it. So, but if you want to take some other course, if there's some other glitzier website or something, yeah, you can do that. Yeah. But I thanks for the question. And I hope to work with you in the future for sure. Uh, Akoma says their webinar is really great, but it would be more meaningful if I could have a soft copy of a list lecture. Is that possible? I could probably provide the slides for you. Yeah. Anna says, I would like to know the procedure to get a hair product that I formulated produced professionally. I don't have formal training. The best way to get your product that you formulated or that you want is to go to a contract manufacturer, work with them, or contact a cosmetic chemist and work with them. You can get any product that you want made. Really, if the most important thing for you is to start your own line and you want to sell products, then I don't recommend that you learn how to make products. A course like mine is great if you're a business owner and you want to know about the technology of what you're using, but that does not mean that you have to become the person who makes the product. In fact, uh, to make a brand successful, I believe the most important thing you should do is learn how to market your brand, learn how to tell a story, and learn how to connect with your customers. You can hire out somebody to do the formulating for you, and to my mind that's better. But if you want to learn how to formulate, you want to become a cosmetic chemist, or you just want to know how to make the products that you want to sell, then yeah, by all means learn how to formulate. Okay, we're just going through answering some questions. We had the webinar already. It'll be recorded. I'll send you a link to when that recording is available, but I'll keep answering questions as long as people keep asking them. We have let's see how many questions we have here. Um, we had at the start we had 75, but now we have 117 active questions. All right, I still got some work to do here. So you just feel free to keep the questions coming. I'm gonna stay on at least another 20 minutes. But if I don't get to your question, even if I don't get to your question, I will send you an email with an answer to that question. So, um, Virtue says, would the active ingredient be considered the 1% line? Not necessarily. It depends. If you're doing an over-the-counter drug and you know the active percent, that could be a lot higher than 1%. It can actually be lower than 1% too. But as far as the 1% line, yeah, you could probably consider most of the ingredients above the 1% line would be considered active ingredients. I would actually prefer to use the term functional ingredients. Those are the ones that provide the function of the formula, and not necessarily all of them either. Like water is above the 1% line, but water is not really a functional or active ingredient. Water is the solvent. So above the 1% line is usually the solvent and the functional or active ingredients. Yeah. Ah, okay. Let's see. We have another question that was sent in early, and this one comes to us from Emna. She says, I noticed air bubbles appearing in my moisturizing cream after 6 months since I made it. Could it be related to preservation problems? Yes, this is definitely indicative of, this definitely could be indicative of microbial contamination. And this is really why you need to do stability testing and also to put a proper preservative in your formulas. This is exactly the kind of thing that can happen. And incidentally, just because you put a preservative in your formula, that doesn't mean that it's going to provide you a guarantee that you'll be microbial free in the future. But yeah, bubbles in your formula over 6 months could definitely be a microbial problem. It doesn't have to be, but it probably is. Memory says, how do you make sure your ingredients are safe? I am planning on using herbals. Well, you can make sure your ingredients are safe by one of the ways is by conducting a microbial spot test. So there are companies like Schulke and Mayer. They have these test strips, and they're an indicator of microbial contamination. So what you need to do these is that you have the strip, you need a small incubator. So you put a sample on there, you test the strip, you see if any microbes are growing. So one of the ways to make sure your ingredients are safe is to definitely check them for microbial contamination. And you don't want to use an ingredient that is contaminated with microbes, of course. Okay, Latoya says, should we list the botanical ingredients to the ingredients list for natural products, and how should they be listed? Uh, the answer is yes. If you're using botanical ingredients in a product, you should list those ingredients. And how they should be listed is that you should check the INCI dictionary for the way to list ingredients and use the names as listed in the INCI dictionary. So hopefully that answers your question there. Pearly says, may I know what is the maximum percentage for functional ingredients to make products that really work? Uh, well, this really depends on what's the product, what's the functional ingredient. There is no maximum percentage per se. Uh, for example, what the best you can do is find the optimal percentage. So let's take an example of our shampoo here. We have primary detergents in there. So, what's the maximum percentage of a primary detergent? Well, you could go all the way up to 100%. Do you need that? No, it's going to be solid. It's not going to spread very well. So, clearly, 100% is too much, and 0%, of course, is not enough. So, somewhere in there. Um, Now, what you could do is so if 100% is too much and 0% is not enough, then you try right in the middle, 50%. Then you could test, is 50% enough or too much? And in the case of detergents, 50% is going to be too irritating, and it's just going to be too expensive. And so then you would cut down, is 25% right? And you just measure, where do I find the optimal level? You don't find the maximum percentage of the functional ingredient, you find the optimal percentage of that ingredient. And you can only find that for a specific ingredient or a specific function, and doing experiments like I just described. All right, Reza asks, how can I make my product unique so that people prefer to buy my product instead of a variety of different brands on the market? Ah, if there were an answer to that, you could be rich. Well, here's the answer. I mean, here is what people do. The way you make your products unique is, first of all, you identify your consumer, your unique consumer. If you're trying to make a product that sells to everybody, uh, you're going to be competing with everybody. You'll be competing with P&G and L'Oreal and Unilever, the big guys, but you'll be competing with all the small guys too. Um, you compete with everybody, and it's really difficult to make yourself stand out if you're competing with everybody. And the thing is, um, you don't want to compete with everybody. What you want to do is create a product that works for a niche to start out. And once you find your consumer niche, find the story, find that, create a product that solves their problem, find a story that appeals to them, and then you become unique to that group. And once you do that, then you can start expanding your marketing efforts. But that's really the only path that I see, short of having millions of dollars to spend in advertising, in which you can stand out among all other brands. Jacqueline says, how do I register for the course? You go to chemistcorner.com/webinar dash special. We had a link there. There should be a link below this. I will send you a link directly in email. Okay, Tanya says, thank you for being open and sharing your knowledge. No problem. I'd like to know, in your opinion, do you think cosmetic chemists should be formulating with biodegradability of the end product in mind? Yes, Tammy, I believe that we should. As formulators, the ingredients end up in the waterways, end up in the environment, and that's is on us to make sure the products are not having a damaging effect. And one of those things recently was what do you call it, the microbeads that were in body washes and facial scrubs and things, and these things were getting into our waterways and clogging things up, and the exact environmental problem, it may have been overblown, but it did lead to some legislation to ban these microbeads. Now, as cosmetic chemists go, we should take that into consideration. We should have took it into consideration, but you can't always anticipate problems. But now that there is that problem, it's really on the chemist to formulate away from problems like that. But you see, I'm not a huge believer in. Well, I believe that the trend of natural formulating is really more of a marketing thing. It's not creating products that are safer. However, what I will say about natural formulating is that from an environmental standpoint, it probably is better. I believe cosmetic chemists should be using sustainable ingredients. We should get away from petroleum based products, not because of any safety issue or any cancer issues, because those are not real. We should be getting away from it because petroleum is a limited resource. We're going to run out of it. And we need to create products that come from renewable sources, plants, things that are biodegradable so they don't negatively impact the environment. We should be following the principles of green chemistry, not because it's a safety issue. It's a better for the planet issue, and I believe that we as formulators have that responsibility, and that's what we should be focused on. And hopefully you can get your management to agree there too, or your purchasing department, really, because it a lot of times does come down to cost. um, Yasmin asks, what makes fragrance in a formula stay longer? That really depends on the fragrance. First, it depends on the fragrance. Some ingredients are just going to evaporate off right away, and the fragrance will go away. So, if you want a fragrance to stay longer, you have to have a lot more base notes. And base notes are just ingredients that have an odor, like a musky odor, those that kind of maple kind of a thing. Those things, or pine. Those things will just last longer because they evaporate more slowly. And so, if you're creating the fragrance, you can make the fragrance last longer. But you could also make the fragrance last longer if you have a film former in your formula. So the film former will trap the fragrance and slowly let it release. So there are a couple of things to do, but the number one thing is to pick a fragrance that lasts longer. Latoya says, "What are the best preservatives to use in a mild natural products for sensitive skin?" Uh, Well, the best preservatives, in my mind, the best preservatives are parabens, but of course, they're not going to qualify in the natural products area. So, for some people, phenoxyethanol is considered natural enough. That's one to use. Um, Other options are, you know, well, if you have sensitive skin, you don't really want to use the organic acids. The question is, can honey be used as a preservative? No, not really. Honey is not a preservative. Honey itself is self-preserving because there's no water in it. But if you're using honey in a formula, in a water-based formula, then you're actually going to be introducing food for microbes to eat. And so, no, honey is not an option there. Okay, let's see. We still have a number of questions. Feel free to keep putting the questions. I'm going to answer questions for 10 more minutes live here, but if you put your question here and you have an email, I will respond via email to answer your question. It'll take me a little while, but I'll get to it over the next couple of days. We have over 200 questions here. Uh, yeah, but hey, we have right now only 122 active questions left, so so that's good. All right, let's see. Next question here. Emily asks, "What equipment would you recommend for ointments and creams?" Ointments and creams. You can use the center stir mixer to create ointments and creams, but it's good to have a homogenizer. So a homogenizer just gets much higher shear, And so, if you're going to be making creams, for sure, homogenizer, ointments, you can still use a center stir mixer with a specific paddle for an ointment. So there you go. Laura says, "Do you have a specialized course to offer? For example, a liquid foundation formulation course?" No, we don't have that at the moment, but I am taking ideas. If you have ideas for courses that you'd like to see, feel free to let me know. What kind of specific course do you want? And maybe I'll send a survey after this to get that. Rochelle asks, does this formulation process apply when we're trying to create a natural hair vitamin? Uh, yes, this process would still apply when trying to create a natural hair vitamin product. The question you have to ask yourself though is, what is the natural hair vitamin product doing? What specifically is it supposed to do? Because the reality is that, hair is dead tissue. Hair is no more alive than, say, a shoelace. And putting vitamins on top of hair, um, is there's not a lot of evidence, a lot of scientific evidence that vitamins in hair have any impact on the hair at all. So you have to first investigate, like, from scientific sources. You could find any kind of source on the internet to tell you, vitamins are great for hair. And marketers will tell you that I specifically been in uh, consumer focus groups where once you put the word vitamin in there, consumers' eyes light up and say, vitamins, we love vitamins. But the reality is, from a science standpoint, vitamins in hair don't really do anything. The only possible exception is provitamin B5 or panthenol. Some people have suggested then they believe data that it can help make hair stronger. I remain skeptical. I've seen the data. It doesn't seem very repeatable to me. So I'm skeptical on that. But all the other vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin C, they have almost no impact on hair. And it's just a marketing story. So take that for what you will. Arena says, what would you suggest for stability testing ovens? Um, this question has been discussed in our forum. So I'd suggest you go to our forum, check out the resources tab there for some suggestions on that. I've never personally bought an oven for doing stability testing. We had stand-up ovens, but if you could get a countertop oven, um, box. I haven't really specifically looked into getting a home based oven for that. So uh, I don't. I would suggest you post that question in our forum. Sue says, "What is a good preservative for a natural shampoo?" We've kind of covered that, but sodium benzoate, benzoic acid, benzyl alcohol, potassium sorbate, sorbic acid. These are all possible things for a natural shampoo. They'd all qualify. Phenoxyethanol, if your level of naturalness accepts that, then that's another possibility. Trent asks, what are the best replacement preservatives for parabens in creams, conditioners that can handle yeast and molds? Phenoxyethanol is definitely one of those. Benzyl alcohol, another. All of these preservative questions make me think that maybe next month we're going to do the preservative webinar, but hopefully that helps. Andrea says, awesome webinar, Perry. Thanks. Oh, thanks. I love the positive feedback. My question is, how can I get around animal testing for cruelty-free products in matters like irritation? So there's two ways to get around that. For irritation, first you use ingredients that have already been previously tested, so that reduces your risk. And then second, you can actually use human patch testing. And I have actually gone to clinics where people offer up their bodies and skin to do patch testing, and for something like irritation, that's definitely something you use. So a human test panel, and as far as animal testing, while humans are animals, they're not considered animals when it comes to creating cruelty-free products. So that's how you would test for irritation. Uh, okay, C says, do you recommend mixing in glass or stainless steel beakers? I think ultimately glass beakers are better in the lab, but it depends on the size. So if you're doing a 1 kilogram or less, then glass beakers are good. That way you can see if the ingredients are going in, if things are dissolving properly, if you're creating any foam. But for bigger sizes, 2 kilograms, 5 kilograms, those beakers get a little too large and unwieldy. So I'd suggest a stainless steel beaker in that case. But there's room for both. Slava says, how do you choose the right emulsifying system? You choose the emulsifier based on the oils that you're using, and the amount of the oils. So you have to match the HLB values of the oils with the HLB value of the emulsifier. And once you can balance those things out properly, um, you can do that. Or you can use a polymeric emulsifying system, and often the polymeric ones, the HLB values aren't nearly as important. So it really depends on the oils you're using and the aesthetics of the cream that you want. Crystal says, Perry, how on earth can you stop some fragrances from thinning a shampoo type formula? I can't seem to get some of my formulas thick enough. Aha, Crystal, you're discovering one of the challenges of being a shampoo formulator. They're just fragrances definitely can thin out shampoo types. So there's one of the solutions to this is you get a different fragrance. You can send the fragrance base to now. If you work at a mid-size or a larger company, you send that fragrance, your unfragrance base, to your fragrance house, and they'll create a fragrance that matches what you want. That's still compatible with your formula. So that's one way. Another way is that you can modify your own formula. If you're using salt as like your main thickening system, fragrance is going to have a big impact. uh, but if you're using a polymeric emulsifier, or I'm sorry, a polymeric thickener, then something like fragrance will have much less impact on the viscosity of your formula. So uh, those are the two possibilities: use a different thickening system, or uh, have your fragrance reformulated. Okay, we're coming down to the end here. 2 hours. My voice is getting a little spent. My tea is gone. It is now. I hope you have enjoyed this. I'm going to answer one more question, but again, keep putting the questions there. If I didn't get to your question on this webinar, I will send it to you via email. And so there's that. All right, let's see. We got a last question here. All right, Tola, you get the last question. Tola says, how would you fix a shampoo that is too thin or lacks foaming? Well, Tola, there's the first thing I would do is to say, okay, why is it too thin? So what's my thickening system? If I would do a salt curve analysis, and a salt curve analysis is you start with 0% salt, test the viscosity, then add some salt, say 0.1% or 0.2%, all the way up to 2%, each time measuring the viscosity and the effect on viscosity. That gives you a graph of salt percentage and viscosity. And usually that'll go up like that. And then you'll get too high and go on the other side of the salt curve, and the viscosity goes down. So if you have thin problems, that's one possibility. Now, that's only going to work for an anionic system. If you're using a non-ionic system or just using something like glucosides, that's not going to work. So you're going to have to use a specific thickener, a cellulose, a xanthan gum, a carbomer. All of these are some acrylic polymer. All of these could help thicken. Now, if your formula lacks foaming, so that's how you fix the thinning. If your formula lacks foaming, then you probably don't have enough surfactant in there. So you can increase the level of surfactant. You could switch out to a more foaming surfactants. If you're using cocoa isoethionates, for example, it doesn't foam as well as something like sodium lauryl sulfate. And so you could use a blend of those two. You could add more of one, take more of one away. You could use a secondary surfactant like a cocamidol propylbutane, like that. And so just in doing these tweaks, switching out surfactants, you could use a foam stabilizer. Like guar actually has a foam stabilizing effect. If you have oils in your formula, you can take those out because those will depress foam. So it really, those are some general things. But to specifically answer that question, I of course need to know, you know, what exactly is in your formula. All right. Whew. That brings us to the 2 hour mark. I am going to shut it down. But I appreciate everybody who joined. If you want to join the course, go to chemistcorner.com/webinar-special. Sign up there. If you enjoy my particular teaching style, this is the style that I use in the course. And if you then you might enjoy the whole course. And once you join the course, you can ask me any questions you want. I'm happy to answer any questions that you send to me. I have students that took the class 3 years ago who continue to send me questions, and I'm happy to answer any of those. If you put in your question here in the webinar here, I know there's still over 100 left, but I've got to wrap this up now. I'll answer it via email. And again, I thank you so much for joining. I hope you found this information useful. It's going to be I'll send you an email about the webinar replay. And again, I'm Perry Romanowski from Chemist Corner. Thank you so much for being part of Chemist Corner.